The scariest part wasn't catching a lie. It was what happened after. I would walk into a conversation knowing what I saw, knowing what I felt, knowing something didn't add up, and somehow walk out wondering if the problem was me. If I was too sensitive, too suspicious, too emotional, too damaged. Little by little, I stopped trusting my discomfort, my memory, my instincts, even my own eyes. And by the time I realized what was happening, I wasn't just trying to figure out whether he was lying. I was trying to figure out whether I could still trust myself. Before we get into this, tell me in the comments, have you ever left a conversation feeling less sure of yourself than when you walked into it? Have you ever known something felt wrong, confronted it, and somehow ended up apologizing, second-guessing yourself, or wondering if you were the one making everything up? And while you're there, tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing where you all are and how these stories resonate with women in so many different places. Stay with me until the end, because today we're talking about one of the cruelest forms of relational harm, not just being lied to, but being slowly trained to distrust your own reality. There is a very specific kind of damage that happens in relationships where gaslighting becomes part of the emotional atmosphere. And I don't just mean lying. I don't just mean denying facts. I don't just mean someone saying, "That's not what happened." I mean something more corrosive than that. I mean what happens when, over time, a person repeatedly distorts what you saw, what you felt, what you meant, what you remember, and what you are allowed to trust in yourself. I mean the kind of relationship where you keep leaving conversations feeling smaller, foggier, less stable, less sure of your own mind. That is what makes gaslighting so destructive. It doesn't only attack the truth. It attacks the part of you that knows how to recognize the truth. At first, it can look small. You notice something off. He says you're overthinking. You bring up a contradiction. He says you misunderstood. You say his tone hurt you. He says you're too sensitive. You remind him of something he said. He says that never happened, or not like that, or not in the way you're making it sound. And because no one argument feels dramatic enough to explain the full damage, you stay. You rationalize. You wonder if maybe communication is just messy sometimes. Maybe he's defensive. Maybe you're both tired. Maybe relationships are hard. Maybe you need to regulate better. Maybe you need to stop assuming the worst. But slowly, the effect accumulates. You start replaying conversations after they end. You start checking old texts just to confirm your memory. You start feeling relief when you have proof of something you know you already experienced. You start hesitating before bringing up your feelings because you already expect them to be twisted back at you. And over time, the deepest wound begins to form. You stop feeling sure inside yourself. This is what so many women fail to name while it's happening. They think the relationship is just conflict-heavy, emotionally draining, or full of misunderstandings. But what they are often living inside is a repeated erosion of self-trust. And self-trust is everything. It is what lets you say, "That felt wrong." It is what lets you say, "No, I remember what happened." It is what lets you say, "I may not have every answer, but I know what my body is telling me." When that gets damaged, the relationship becomes more than painful. It becomes disorienting. And today I want to talk about that disorientation. Because the worst thing gaslighting does is not just make you doubt him. It makes you doubt the one person you need most in order to survive. Yourself. Let's imagine Natalie's story. Natalie had been with Chris for almost 2 years. In the beginning, he seemed calm, steady, emotionally intelligent. He knew how to speak in a measured way. He rarely raised his voice. He always had an explanation. And to someone who had been in obviously chaotic relationships before, that calmness looked like safety. But over time, Natalie started feeling something she couldn't quite explain. Little things didn't add up. Chris would say he was one place, then a detail later would make that story wobble. He would tell her he had forgotten to mention something that felt too important to forget. He would insist she had agreed to things she didn't remember agreeing to. There were moments where his energy changed around his phone, moments where his timeline felt fuzzy, moments where his reactions didn't match the question she had asked. The first few times she brought things up, she expected a simple conversation. Instead, she got turned around. If she said, "That doesn't line up with what you told me yesterday," he would respond with something like, "That's not what I said." "You always twist things." If she said, "I felt like you were hiding something," he would sigh and say, "You're looking for problems that aren't there." If she said, "I know what I heard," he would answer, "No, you're remembering it wrong." At first, Natalie stayed anchored in herself. She knew what she noticed. She trusted the tension in her body. She trusted that something felt off. But Chris never responded with obvious panic. He responded with calm correction. That made it worse, because his tone was controlled enough to make her feel irrational in comparison. He looked steady while she was getting emotional. He sounded certain while she was trying to explain why something felt wrong. And little by little, she started leaving each conversation with the same horrible feeling. Not clarity, not resolution, but self-doubt. Then came the moment that shifted something in her more deeply. Natalie saw a message preview pop up on his phone. It was brief, but enough to raise questions. When she brought it up, Chris didn't just deny anything inappropriate. He acted like her concern itself was the issue. "Are you serious right now?" "It was nothing. You always do this. You make everything weird. You're so paranoid lately." By the end of the conversation, Natalie wasn't focused on the message anymore. She was focused on whether she had become the kind of woman who imagined betrayal where there was none. That is how the dynamic worked. The original issue kept getting replaced by a new one: her reaction, her tone, her insecurity, her memory, her sensitivity. And once that pattern set in, Natalie started changing. She became less spontaneous. She became more careful with her words. She started mentally preparing before bringing up concerns. She reread old conversations. She took screenshots. She kept notes in her phone after arguments, just so she could prove to herself later that she wasn't making things up. That is a terrifying place to end up in a relationship, because by then, the problem was no longer just whatever Chris was or wasn't doing. The problem was that Natalie no longer felt safe inside her own perception. She knew something was wrong, but she no longer knew whether she was allowed to trust that knowing. And that is where gaslighting becomes a psychological wound, not just a cat-eye issue. So why is gaslighting so damaging? Because it doesn't work by making you forget reality completely. It works by creating just enough confusion, just enough contradiction, just enough self-doubt that you stop standing firmly in your own reading of things. That's important to understand. Gaslighting is not just someone saying, "That didn't happen." It is an ongoing pattern of invalidating, distorting, minimizing, reversing, and reframing your experience until your certainty starts collapsing from the inside. And what makes it so effective is repetition. One invalidating comment may hurt, but repeated invalidation rewires. If every time you name your discomfort, it gets mocked. If every time you question an inconsistency, it gets turned into your flaw. If every time you trust your own memory, it gets reframed as confusion, exaggeration, oversensitivity, paranoia, or drama, then eventually, your mind starts preparing for self-doubt before the conversation even begins. That's how the control happens. It doesn't always happen through obvious domination. Sometimes it happens through subtle destabilization, through calm contradiction, through a tone that implies you're the unreasonable one, through turning your reaction into the central problem until you can't even stay focused on the original issue anymore. And that is exactly what happened to Natalie. Chris didn't always need to win by proving a different reality. He only needed to make her uncertain enough that she would stop trusting her own. Once that happened, he gained something incredibly powerful. He no longer had to fully convince her. He only had to weaken her certainty. That is what so many women miss while it's happening. They think, maybe we just remember things differently, or maybe we communicate badly, or maybe I'm too activated and that's why I get confused. But when the same pattern keeps leaving you more confused than when you started, that matters. Because healthy disagreement does not make you lose your center. Two people can absolutely remember things differently. They can argue. They can misinterpret tone. They can have different perspectives. But in a healthy conflict, your reality does not keep getting erased. Your body does not keep leaving the room more scrambled. Your instinct does not keep getting punished until it learns silence. That's the key difference. Gaslighting creates autosuspicion, self-suspicion. It teaches you to monitor yourself more than the actual problem. It shifts your attention away from the inconsistency and onto your own supposed instability. And once that becomes the emotional pattern, the relationship starts taking something from you that is incredibly hard to rebuild later. The felt sense that your own mind is a trustworthy place to stand. That loss is not small, because without self-trust, everything becomes harder. Setting boundaries, naming lies, leaving unhealthy dynamics, making decisions, feeling safe in your own body, believing your instincts early enough to protect yourself. That's why gaslighting is so much more than "he lied a lot." The lie hurts, yes, but the deeper harm is that he keeps making your contact with reality feel unreliable. And after enough time, that unreliability starts living inside you even when he isn't in the room. You start pre-doubting yourself. You start revising your own memory before anyone even challenges it. You start fearing that your intuition might just be damage, drama, insecurity, or madness. That is a serious wound. Because once your intuition becomes something you fear instead of something you trust, the damage has already gone very deep. And this is where the pain becomes devastating. What happens inside a woman after she has spent enough time in a relationship that trained her not to trust herself? Natalie didn't just leave conversations feeling confused. She started living confused. She became hyper-aware of her own tone, overly careful with her wording, afraid of sounding dramatic, afraid of being that girl who is too suspicious, too reactive, too emotional, too much. She began to check herself constantly. Before saying something, she would ask herself, "Am I sure?" After saying something, she would ask herself, "Did I exaggerate?" After an argument, she would replay every word and wonder whether she had imagined the whole emotional truth of what happened. That level of self-monitoring is exhausting. It drains spontaneity. It drains confidence. It drains the basic internal steadiness that lets you move through life feeling like your inner compass still belongs to you. And the worst part is that, from the outside, she didn't necessarily look shattered. She looked hesitant, careful, more withdrawn, more anxious, less sure of herself, which often made the whole thing even easier for him to keep doing, because the more unstable she felt, the more credible his version of her became. That is part of the cruelty of gaslighting. The damage it causes can start making the victim look exactly the way the manipulator has been describing her all along: confused, emotional, uncertain, unreliable. Not because she was those things to begin with, but because being repeatedly destabilized has consequences. Natalie also started losing access to something softer and more intuitive in herself. She no longer trusted the first flicker of discomfort. She no longer trusted the pause in her chest that said, "Something is off." She no longer trusted the feeling of contradiction. Instead, she translated those things into self-surveillance. Maybe I'm spiraling. Maybe this is my trauma. Maybe I'm making him into the bad guy. Maybe I should calm down before I trust what I'm feeling. Now, of course, self-reflection matters. Emotional regulation matters. Not every fear is truth. But when self-reflection becomes automatic self-erasure, something is very wrong. And that was the point Natalie eventually reached. She was policing her own perception harder than she was examining his behavior. That is what gaslighting trains. Not wisdom, not humility, not healthy perspective. It trains a woman to become less dangerous to the lie by becoming more suspicious of herself than of the person distorting her. And once that happens, even leaving the relationship doesn't immediately solve it. Because the dynamic doesn't end when the conversation ends. It lingers inside the nervous system. She may still question herself later, even in safer relationships. She may still need proof for feelings she used to trust naturally. She may still fear sounding irrational when she is actually perceiving something clearly. That residue is real. So if you have lived through this, I want to say something very clearly. You are not weak for being affected by it. And you are not broken because your intuition got quieter. It got quieter because it kept getting punished. It got quieter because every time it tried to protect you, it was told it was dramatic, unstable, wrong, or embarrassing. That is not your failure. That is the effect of repeated distortion. And the healing often begins in one simple but terrifying place: letting yourself believe that what you felt may have been true all along. Not perfect, not omniscient, not beyond question, but true enough to deserve your respect. Because the worst damage was never only that he lied. The worst damage was that you started feeling like your own mind was no longer a safe place to live. And no one deserves that. So let me close this episode with one very clear truth. You did not lose your sense of reality all by yourself. It was slowly worn down inside a relationship that taught you to distrust yourself more than you distrusted the lie. And that distinction matters. Because so many women leave these relationships thinking the damage means something is deeply wrong with them. They think, why did I get so confused? Why didn't I trust myself sooner? Why did I keep second-guessing everything? And in that shame, they accidentally continue the gaslighting on their own, after the relationship has already done enough damage. But confusion after repeated distortion is not proof of weakness. It is a human response to being psychologically destabilized over time. If someone repeatedly minimizes what you saw, reframes what you felt, denies what happened, mocks your reaction, or teaches you that every instinct you have is probably an overreaction, then of course your confidence in yourself begins to fray. That does not mean you were irrational. It means your reality was being interfered with. And this is why the healing is not only about spotting his lies. It is about rebuilding the relationship you have with your own perception. Rebuilding the ability to say, that felt wrong. I remember that clearly. I know what my body is telling me. I do not need his agreement in order to trust my discomfort. That is powerful. And it takes time. Because once gaslighting has lived in your nervous system long enough, even truth can feel dangerous at first. Self-trust can feel arrogant. Intuition can feel suspicious. Confidence can feel risky. But none of that means those things are wrong. It only means they were attacked. You were not crazy for noticing. You were not dramatic for feeling unsettled. You were not too much for wanting the facts to line up with what you were being told. And you were not broken because part of you eventually stopped knowing what to believe. You were being slowly taught that your inner world was not trustworthy. That is a wound, not an identity. And if you are still carrying that wound, I want you to hear this as clearly as possible. The goal is not to become someone who never questions herself. The goal is to become someone who no longer abandons herself at the first sign of contradiction. That is different. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to reflect. You are allowed to check your facts. But you are also allowed to respect the first quiet voice inside you that says, something is not right here. Because that voice may have been silenced, but it was never your enemy. And if this relationship made you feel like your own mind was slipping away, the healing begins when you stop asking, was I crazy? And start asking a much truer question. What happened to me that made trusting myself feel so dangerous? That question opens the right door. Now I really want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what was the phrase, the pattern, or the moment that made you realize you no longer trusted yourself? Was there a conversation that left you feeling crazy? A lie you saw clearly, but still ended up doubting? A sentence that kept echoing in your head? Share your story because your experience might help another woman understand that what she has been calling going crazy may actually be the aftermath of gaslighting. And if this episode spoke to you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.